Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen. This is Dr. Mary Payton with All About STEM Radio. I come to you every Monday from 7 to 8 p.m. Central Time here from Globe Life Park at Fishbowl Radio Network. And hey, it was a beautiful day today. I got out, went to the park, walked. I'm trying to function within this retirement that we're trying to see is going to last how long? Because, I've done this a few times. I'm already missing a few things. One of the things I'm missing is working with young people. Now, if you are a teacher or in education, hey, I want y'all to think about this. Last year, I worked with a program called Elementary, whereas my students could write stories and do coding and animation. So if you're looking to have your students do something other than a PowerPoint presentation for a presentation that they have to do, they can do a breakout room. They can animate whatever information that you want them to show. You'll go to Elementary.io, and I think you will love it. Well, today I have a guest from California. His name is Neil Thompson. He is the founder of Teach the Geek. He is also, just like myself, a STEM children's book author, which y'all know I love children's book authors and STEM authors. And I've got to start making a list of all my authors and all their books and connecting it to my Facebook page so that all my listeners can see that, to include my book, Taylor STEM Adventures Texas and Taylor STEM Adventures Hawaii, because there are a lot of great authors out there, and a place where we can get books and information for our kids. But without any further ado, Neil, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, hey, it's great to hear from you and to have you to come on the show. I forget, what's her name? Gina, I think, introduced me to you. She said I had to get you on here. I don't know if you remember her. She's going to be on next week. So I'm kind of excited about that.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Huh?
I remember.
Yeah. So I met her at a conference given by STEM Media back in, I think they had their second conference in November, and that was pretty nice. And she said, you have to have Neil on your show. And I'm like, okay. I reached out to you and you agreed, so I'm totally excited. So can you take a moment and introduce yourself to our guest?
Sure.
I mean, to our listeners.
Yeah, I figured that's what you meant. Yeah, absolutely. As you said, my name is Neil Thompson, and I do a bunch of things. I used to work in medical devices as a product development engineer, but since then I've started a few other ventures. So one of them is working as a patent agent. So I help inventors with their patent applications, drafting them and then prosecuting them with the patent office. And I also have Teach the Geek, which you mentioned. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. And the first offering of the platform is a public speaking course geared towards engineers and scientists called Teach the Geek to Speak. The motivation for that course stemmed from my own struggles having to give presentations in front of senior management on a monthly basis and not being very good at it at first, noticing a lot of the other engineers weren't all that much better at it than I was, but I got a lot better at it over time because I didn't want to look like a fool every time I had to present in front of the CEO. So I certainly got better, and I turned everything that I learned into a course. And as you mentioned, I also have a children's book, and it's called Ask Uncle Neil, Why is My Hair Curly? It's about my nephew asking me why his hair is the way it is, and I use science to answer the question. The motivation for the book is to encourage more Black children to consider careers in STEM, as we are highly underrepresented, and I don't feel like it has to be that way.
I know that's right. You are so correct about that. But before we get into Teach the Geek and the book, because we're going to get a lot more into both of those later, can you tell us a little bit about your journey into engineering and what you're doing now? Because you didn't tell me about working with the patent office.
Oh yeah, I guess I
I got
forgot
a
about
lot of
that.
questions.
I do so many things sometimes I forget about all the various things I have going on. So actually, I went into engineering because my father said I should, and I used to lie about that reason because I was a bit embarrassed by it. Because oftentimes when you ask people how they got into engineering, they usually have a pretty interesting story about it. Maybe they were in robotics club when they were in high school. Maybe they played with Legos as a child. I didn't have any Legos as a child, and I certainly wasn't in a robotics club. I was marginally good at math and science at best. But my father, I guess, saw that engineering was a stable field, and he suggested I do it. And so I did. And I studied materials engineering. I got a master's in biomedical engineering. And soon after that, I started working in medical devices. Going into patents actually wasn't even my idea either. It seems like I'm just a follower. I just listen to what people say to do. But, but when I became a patent agent because the boss that I had at the time had asked the engineers that were working at the company, it was a startup company, to become patent agents so he wouldn't have to outsource patent drafting to outside counsel. And I remember thinking that it was something I had to do. Turns out that wasn't the case because none of the other engineers did it. Only I did. So I became a patent agent. And wouldn't you know, he still outsourced all the patent drafting to outside counsel. So that was a few years ago. I'm a patent agent with no patents to draft. Luckily, a couple of years into me being a patent agent, I decided to freelance and just pick up whatever inventors I could and draft their applications. I saw that I wasn't really getting the type of applications that I really wanted. It was kind of just whatever I was able to scrounge up. So a few years ago, or a couple of years ago, I started working with a law firm here in the San Diego area where I live, and we focus mainly on life science innovations.
Oh.
So that would be biotech, medical devices, and pharma. So I work a lot with the medical device inventions.
Okay. So exactly what does a patent agent do?
So a patent agent, oftentimes people think about patent agents and they think of patent attorneys, and what's the difference? The difference is law school. So attorneys went to law school and they passed the bar in a jurisdiction. Patent agents didn't go to law school, but they have the ability, just like patent attorneys, to draft patent applications, file them with the patent office, and then essentially be the go-between between the patent office and the inventor to try to get their inventions patented.
Now, how important is it for an inventor to get something patent? I mean, if you make something, you get it out there and you start selling it, what is the rationale? How important is it? Why should someone get something patent?
Well, what a patent is essentially an instrument to keep others from making, selling, or using your invention. So if you were to develop something, an invention, and then start selling it without a patent, other people could make, use, and sell it. So essentially, you're inviting competition. But if you were to get a patent, you're essentially preventing these other entities from making, using, and selling your invention.
Now, I don't know if you know the answer to this question. What is the difference between having something patent and having something trademarked?
Trademarks are for brands, and patents are for more tangible items. So things that you can kind of see and feel. So machines, processes, software in some cases. But when you get a trademark, it's more of the, I guess, like the swoosh, the Nike swoosh, or even a logo. Those are trademarks.
Okay. So that's more for branding and your brand and stuff like that.
That's right.
Okay. All right. So that makes sense. That really makes sense.
Why did you think I wouldn't know the answer to that?
Well, I didn't know because I didn't even know you did patents until just now, and so this turned into a whole different kind of show.
You're not going to stump me with any of your questions. I promise you.
Because I had a guest year before last who worked with children, and part of his thing was why they went through his program, and he would work with these groups of kids for like 3 years, 3+ years, but his goal was to have them patent something. So he had kids in middle school that had patents, and I had asked him, I said, well, why is it important for a kid to have a patent? He said, well, all those kids that go to Ivy League schools, every single one of them, at least, I mean, all of them have good grades, they have good test scores, they've done community service. He said, but less than 1% of them have patents. So I just thought it was interesting. So I didn't know, the difference between branding and patenting, and because I kind of thought it all went together. But I guess
Man, that's a pretty expensive college application then. If you're getting a patent. Yeah, patents aren't cheap.
Let me tell you something. If you meet some of these kids, they're really cool kids, and I go out to some of their activities sometime, and I sit there and I watch how those kids' brains work. They're still kids, but they're kind of scary. But they're really, really smart. So I enjoy it. But they're still kids, and that's what I like about it. So, but anyway, that's a whole different story. So, how long have you been doing the patenting stuff?
Well, I became a patent agent in 2012, but I didn't actually start using it in earnest until 2015. And I started working with the firm that I'm with in 2019.
Okay. All right. I mean, that's interesting. So now I want to transition a little bit. I have to kind of keep my eye on the time because we have till, well, I'll get to talking and we'll run out of time. So I have to be very careful. It happens when you're a school teacher. But taking from what you know and where you came from as an engineer, why did you start? You gave us a little bit of why you started Teach the Geek, but why is what you're doing so important? Because everybody wants to work with kids and get kids involved, but you're working with not only kids but adults.
Yeah, so Teach the Geek really, as I mentioned, it stemmed from my own failings or my own struggles, and I saw the other engineers have these struggles too. I mean, a lot of us people in engineering, we have all this technical expertise, but we're not the best at distilling it in such a way that non-engineers or decision makers can really take in. I mean, I mentioned I had to give presentations on a monthly basis in front of senior management, and oftentimes, at least initially, I'd get questions that I thought I had answered after the presentation. But because I hadn't put the presentation in such a way that these people could understand, I was getting these questions. So essentially, I was wasting my time because I didn't present in an effective manner. I was wasting their time because they had to ask these questions. I was basically a lot of time was being wasted. And so I knew I had to get better at public speaking or just communicating with these people. And so that's essentially where Teach the Geek was born.
Okay. And you're so right, because, I mean, a lot of technical people, because I have to catch myself sometimes, a lot of technical people, we know what we're talking about, but a lot of people don't know what we're talking about because, sometimes things may be a little bit too technical for them, or we don't get the opportunity to talk a lot. Well, I do now, since I've got this show. But what are some of the downfalls that you see engineers have when you talk about them having to communicate some of their ideas and information to where other people can understand it?
I mean, the major one is not being able to advance in the company. Oftentimes, it's not the smartest person or the most proficient technical person that gets the promotions, the person that's able to network and build relationships with people. So if you're not able to communicate with these decision makers, the people that have the authority to give you those promotions and those pay raises that you may want, then you're going to be stuck in your cubicle as an engineer the rest of your life, and you have no one to blame but yourself.
And that's so right, because we technical people are so used to working and nitpicking and just kind of being happy where we are that we don't always portray ourselves as a mover or a shaker. And,
yeah.
And most of us don't play golf.
Does mini golf count? I don't see a lot of deals getting done on the putt-putt court. Or on the putt-putt court.
On the putt-putt or the Nintendo Switch or any of those things.
Yeah, nothing's getting done when you're trying to knock that ball through the windmill. I don't see that.
But you're right. It's being able to communicate who you are, what you're doing for the company is extremely important. And like we just said, many of us don't go to the golf course or wherever else other execs go. Golf course, sitting in a box at a baseball game or something like that. And that's where my studio is one of the boxes here at Globe Life Park. So, it's kind of exciting. But when you work with some of the engineers, what are some of the things that you try to instill in them?
Well, the number one rule of any public speaker, whether they're an engineer or not, is knowing your audience. I mentioned that I used to get up in front of these people and have to give these presentations, and I wouldn't take what they needed to know or how they would benefit from getting the information into account when I was putting the presentations together. I'll just slap some slides together, get up there, read them, and try to get out of there as quickly as possible. But I eventually saw that wasn't working. It's really important to know how these people take in that information so you can prepare your slides or your presentation in a way that's effective. And that's the biggest I think downfall for a lot of engineers. We're not really thinking about the others. We're just thinking about how can I do this as quick and painless in a way as possible.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are interviewing today Mr. Neil Thompson, founder of Teach the Geek, and we are talking about getting engineers to do better presentation, public speaking, and so on and so forth. We just talked about him being a patent agent, which is something I did not know, and he didn't have in his notes, so I had to talk badly about him about that, but that's okay. Now I know more, so I can pick his brains when I need to. But let's get back to talking about Teach the Geek. When someone comes to you or look at your coursework, well, let me back this up. How is your coursework set up to help engineers to better speak or do public speaking?
Well, the course itself is a 6-step process of developing and delivering any speech, no matter what. And it starts off with the knowing your audience, and it ends with what I call self-reflection. So taking in what others have said and what you think of your presentation and then improving on it. And when I first put the course together, it wasn't set up as a process. It was just a bunch of videos that I did at my kitchen room table with poor lighting, just talking off the top of my head about the things that I thought were important about public speaking. Luckily, I had a friend who saw these videos and said, "You can't release this. You have to do this over." And it was actually someone else that suggested I make it a process. Looking back on it, it's kind of crazy that I didn't think of that in the first place, because I worked in medical devices, and for any medical device that you develop, you have to follow a process. So the fact that I didn't even think about that for my own course, it's kind of sad in a sense. But eventually I got the hint and I made it into a process, and that's what it is now.
Okay. Now, if someone wanted to contact you or find your videos or become a part of your training program, where would they find you?
Well, they can go to teachthegeek.com, and I also have what I call an excuse assessment form or tool. Essentially, it is a way to prioritize solutions to problems based on the severity of those problems. And to get that excuse assessment tool, you can go to download.teachthegeek.com.
Okay. All right. So if someone went to your website, what would they find there?
Well, they find more information about the course. They find more information about myself. They'd also find a link to my podcast and YouTube channel. So I also interview scientists and engineers about public speaking. It's really interesting to hear their stories on their journeys to becoming more effective at public speaking. But not only that, just hearing about the various career paths that they've embarked on. I mean, you get this STEM degree, and perhaps you think that this is what you need to do for the rest of your career. But a lot of times people, they make changes. And it's always interesting to hear from those people and to hear about the various things that they've done throughout their careers.
And you're so right, because I I was talking to a lady who had a degree in mechanical engineering. She went in the military and she was a navigator. And one of the old school navigators where you did everything with charts and maps and rulers and all of that. And then once the aircrafts became, the GPS systems and the other guided systems, her job was phased out. So you have to change with the times and look at us as teachers now, or me as a teacher as I was in Hawaii. We've got to become so much more proficient in teaching online, and and a lot of engineers are working from home. How do you deal with that? How do you present at home? Do you teach anything on that? Or maybe that may be something you may want to think about, is teaching engineers how to do presentations from home, in a Zoom format, because that's got to be really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I put the course together, we weren't in this COVID-19 world yet, so there wasn't much in the course on that. But since then yes, I have added more information about virtual presentations.
Yeah, because when we're at home, we're totally in a whole different environment. If you're home with kids, you may have kids running behind you, putting up those backgrounds behind you, all that kind of thing, and actually being able to share your screen and so on and so forth, because those were all things that I needed to learn. When you're teaching engineering online to kids, if the first few weeks were rough, but it got better. So do you have any pointers that you would want to give to young engineers who may want to seek out you for help in becoming better presenters?
Yeah, so they can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm on all the social media channels too, Instagram, Facebook, but they could also email me at hello@teachthegeek.com.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. But what I was wanting to know is, do you have anything that you would tell them, some of these young engineers who are older engineers, because it's not just young engineers that would want to use you, what would be one of the things that they need to think about when they start coming to you and looking for assistance in being a better communicator?
Oh, I see. Yeah, so I mean, sure, we certainly could talk about the course, but then it's also just being open to the feedback. A lot of times, especially as us engineers, we can be a bit arrogant, especially since we got these engineering degrees, and we can go into a whole lot of different fields that perhaps people with other degrees can't. But it's just being, I guess, what's the word, vulnerable and open to that feedback, to getting better. I mean, that really applies to young and old engineers alike.
And that is so true, because sometimes I have had to take myself a step back, especially when I went into the classroom from being a chemical officer with the military. I had to take those steps as, I'm like, you don't understand the words that are coming out of my mouth. I'm starting to sound like, what's his name, Chris Rock, or, you don't understand me. I'm saying the words that you should know. And I had to back up a little bit. So you're right. That vulnerability is extremely important, and that may be one of the reasons some people veer away from speaking and not being able to get promoted, because they have the attitude that they're not going to listen to me anyway. So yeah, I mean, sound like that you're giving them some empowerment for themselves.
Certainly. I mean, at least I hope so. And they haven't told me I haven't been, so I think I'm on the right track so far.
Now, are you working one-on-one? Do you work one-on-one, or do you work small group, or are we working with series of videos? Or all of the above?
Currently I work with the course, but I'm always looking into other ways that I can impact engineers and scientists. So smaller groups, one-on-one, I'm certainly open to both, and I'm currently developing offers in both of those areas.
What is some of the feedback that you've gotten from some of the people you work with?
They really like the streamlined nature of the course. I mean, the fact that there's very little fluff in there. I mean, I've taken courses before, and I found that a lot of them, there's a lot of extraneous information that I don't particularly care to have. I really would just want to get kind of to the meat of everything. And so that's one of the things that I've heard about the course. And just that there being a process, people really like that. And as I mentioned before, the fact that I didn't even think of a process before, I'm so glad that that person pointed it out to me, because if I had put out what I had, I probably wouldn't be getting the feedback that I'm getting now.
Great. And I like how you answered that. People are always looking for ways to improve themselves, but when we think of engineers, we think that they know everything. They can process everything, and being able to give them this information in a format that is more streamlined, because that's one thing about being engineers, specifically. We don't like all that extra, well, not we, because I'm not an engineer, I'm a scientist. We don't like all that extra fluff. Tell me what you're going to tell me, how you're going to tell me, and then I'm gonna do what you need me to do. So yeah, and sound like your course is giving them what they need. Have you heard of any of the outcomes or feedback from any of your people? Or did I ask that already? But
you did, but I could answer it again if you'd like.
Yeah, we just went through that. Hey, okay, I'm having a moment. But ladies and gentlemen, if you are just joining us, we are talking to Mr. Neil Thompson. He is the founder of Teach the Geek, helping engineers to better communicate, and he is also a STEM writer, and we are getting ready to transition into talking about his book, Ask Uncle Neil. So, Neil, what you told me why you wrote this book, because your nephew asked you why his hair was curly. But before you wrote the book, what was some of the information? I mean, when he asked you that question, what was your initial reaction?
I actually didn't know the answer, so I really wanted to find out for myself. And so I did some research, and then I got the idea, let me put this in a children's book. There are a lot of books out there about hair, specifically black people's hair, but it comes from the viewpoint of accepting or loving your hair. I was never going to write such a book because I never had an issue with my hair to begin with. It wasn't something that was on my mind. But the idea of marrying hair with science, I mean, that just seemed like a no-brainer. And I didn't see any books out there that addressed that topic. And so I thought I could be the first. Eventually, I wanted to make this a series. So, the first book is Ask Uncle Neil, Why Is My Hair Curly? And eventually, I want to write other books where my nephew is asking me a question, and I use science to answer it.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know what research you had, but when we really talk about differences in genotypes and phenotypes and protein synthesis, we don't talk about that until you get into 9th or 10th grade. So those questions are not ever answered at a younger age. If they're answered, they're answered. Well, why is your hair so curly? Well, because you're black. But you meet a lot of people in different countries and different places, like I have, that have melanin in their skin and their hair is straight. So what is the difference? So did you take this from the protein synthesis point of view, or what point of view did you take to answer these questions?
Well, that was one of them. So if you actually read the book, there's a bunch of different things I talk about.
Of it.
What was that?
You didn't send me a copy of it.
Oh, I apologize.
We'll do a book share. We'll do a
I
book
probably
share.
could have. I certainly could have. Although I could say you didn't ask for one.
And I was thinking about that when I was going through all my books the other day. I'm like, I didn't ask for a copy of his book.
Yeah. You put it on yourself. You want to throw it back in my throw it in my face. I can throw it right back. But yeah, I actually, so in the book I talk about a bunch of the various, I guess, potential answers to that question, and then the end of it is actually pretty interesting. I don't want to spoil the ending for anybody, but if they actually read it, I think they'll get a kick out of the ending and what it means to do research.
And I mean, and to get kids to do research too. Now, you wrote this based on a question that your nephew asked you. How old was your nephew, if you don't mind me asking?
He was 9 at the time.
Oh, okay. So he wasn't really young. He was legitimately interested. Because some kids will ask questions when they're 4 and 5 and 6, and we can just give them one of those vague answers. But because he was 9, he was actually interested. So when you did the book and you went through it with him, what did he think about it?
Well, one of the things I didn't mention about it is no one knew that I was writing the book. They only knew about it once they got it in the mail. They got quite a kick out of it when my nephew saw himself on the cover of a children's book, and my sister she called me once they got it, and she was a little amused, to say the least, and she was quite shocked. I like surprises.
And you are an engineer, so most of y'all don't like surprises. It's like this, but that's okay. And that makes you you, and that makes you different. Now, when you did the book, did you self-publish or did you go through a publishing company?
I self-published.
Okay. And who did your illustrations?
I had hired an illustrator that I found on Google, and she drew drawings that I didn't like. I couldn't use them. They were terrible. So eventually I found another illustrator on Fiverr, of all places, and this person did a wonderful job for less money. So that's whose illustrations I ended up using.
And that's interesting because as a author, especially a children's book author, finding someone to do illustrations for us is one of the most important things. Is bringing us to life, bringing what we've put together to life, and having to learn how to storyboard. I don't know if you did storyboards. Did you do storyboards with your illustrator?
Well, what I did was I wrote out the words, the manuscript essentially, and then I explained to her what each page should look like, and she really brought my vision to life. She must have, either I did a really good job of explaining, or she's just really good at just getting into people's brains, because what she came up with was just outstanding.
Because that's how I've done it in the past, is take the manuscript, go page by page, and going back and forth, and changing minor or sometimes major details. How long did it take you to write your book?
I mean, the actual manuscript was less than a month, but then it was, as I mentioned, I went through 2 illustrators, so by the time it was done, it was maybe 3 months.
Mm-hmm. And when did your book come out?
It came out in the summer of 2018.
Okay. So how much exposure have you been able to have? I know COVID-19 has kind of stopped us from a lot of the exposure, because I haven't been able to go to any book events or anything like that. But how much exposure have you been able to have with it?
So I've done some before COVID, I did some book signings, and then I also did some school visits. And then I talk about the book on podcasts like this. Only recently, within the last few months, because I guess just because of COVID and trying to determine or develop other ways to get the book out there, I've been using influencer marketing, but I'm pretty I'm close to the infancy of that effort, so I can't really say whether it's working or not, but
Yeah.
we'll see.
Okay. I think I lost the last little bit that you said, that you're not sure how the influencer is working yet because you're still early in that.
That's right.
Yeah. Um, I had another question, and then you blanked off. Now I've got to come back and remember what it is. If someone wanted to get your book, how would they get it?
They can go to
Let's give them the full name
askuncleneil.com.
first. I'm sorry. Let's give them the full name first. It's
Oh, yeah.
Ask
So
Uncle Neil, why is my hair curly? I
that's
love
right.
that name. But anyway, if once someone wanted to get the book, how would they get it? Where would they get it?
They can go to askuncleneil.com.
Okay. All right. And I love your website for that. So you have a website for the book and you have a website for Teach the Geek. So, and Teach the Geek is teachthegeek.com
That's right.
and askuncleneil.com for the book.
Correct.
Okay. Now, when you were able to go into schools and talk about the book, how were you accepted?
Oh, I was accepted. I was accepted right away. It was really interesting because I would go into these classrooms and you'd have kids of different races and ethnicities, but they all seem to gravitate towards it because maybe they start thinking about their own hair and why their hair is the way it is. So it's a lot of fun talking to these kids about the book.
And that I find that exciting too, because kids now want to know. They want to know about certain things. They want to know about hair texture, skin color, eye color, because we do teach genetics, or they want to know about the area that they're in. Now, have you thought of any other topics that you may want to hit on for other publications?
I'm thinking about one you mentioned it about skin color, so that might be the next one. But after that, I'm pretty open. But essentially, it's going to be my nephew asking me a question, and I use science to answer it.
I like that because, wait a minute, what other questions has he asked you lately, or since the book?
Well, he certainly has asked me about skin color, and then he's asked me about how vacuum cleaners work.
Oh.
So maybe that might be one too. Who knows? But yeah, we'll see, I suppose.
I mean, I like that because so many times we tell kids what things are, and that's important to know what they are, but it is extremely empowering to know how they work. And we don't always explain that to kids. Now, going back to when you were a child, which was probably not that long ago, did you ever have any questions that you ever wanted answered that you may or may not have gotten answered, that you asked your parents or a teacher or someone?
I don't recall really asking teachers anything, and frankly, I don't remember asking my parents much of anything either. I mean, neither of them are in the STEM field, so who knows? Even if I had asked them, I doubt they would even have the answer. They probably would just go look it up in the encyclopedia or something. That's what they would have said.
Hey, you just used a word that a lot of kids don't know.
What, encyclopedia?
At home. Encyclopedia. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a set, Encyclopedia Britannica.
We had World Book, but World Book preceded Encyclopedia Britannica. So that's what I grew up with. But you're right. We have to ask those questions and answer those questions. And our kids are asking legitimate questions now that aren't answered until, when we talk about STEM type questions, until they get into high school. when we start talking about especially the biology pieces, eye color, hair color, why do men get facial hair and women don't get facial hair, that kind of thing. So I just enjoy this. So I'm gonna have to get a copy of your book so I can go through it and make sure I'm aware of what's in there, and maybe talk to my nieces and nephews about why their hair is curly. But
Wonderful.
so, did you enjoy the process of writing the book?
Oh yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have done it if I didn't enjoy it. It certainly was. It was a labor of love, really. I mean, the idea of making it into a series came after the fact, but even just doing the research, trying to find out these answers, and then putting it in such a way that little kids could understand and appreciate and enjoy reading, that absolutely was a fun process.
Is it a chapter book or is it just a storybook? What age level are we looking at with your book?
Oh, it's certainly not a chapter book. It's for younger kids. I'd say younger than 8. I mean, I wanted to make the book for young kids because I really want them to know that there are no careers off limits to them. I want them to have that confidence, and even if there are naysayers later in life that come in their way and tell them things that they can and can't do, they have the confidence from when they were young to know that that's not the case and they can do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you go to schools, do any of the kids ask you about STEM fields?
Well, actually, that's typically part of the presentation. So, I mean, I do the reading of the book, and then I just talk about myself and how I came into engineering and what it takes to become an engineer and the different types of engineering. And yeah, I mean, after that, then you get all these questions about it, and it's a lot of fun.
And I'm happy to hear that because, as I said earlier, so many kids don't know that there are a variety of engineering fields, and being able to transition, such as you have, to become a patent agent. So, when you go into classes, what is like one or two of your most asked questions?
Well, one of them would be about actually, a lot of them ask about the book and the actual, how I put it together. Ironically, I wouldn't expect that from little kids, but they ask about that, and then they ask about the drawings too. So that's always an interesting question too that I get.
Well, kids are so visual, so I can see why they ask about the drawings. Have you ever thought about coming up with a activity book or a lab book that would coincide with your Ask Uncle Neil books?
I have gotten that suggestion before. I'd have to give more thought as to what it would look like, though.
And I've been thinking about that too, because my books are travel books about the various states. I have one book, Taylor STEM Adventures Texas, and one book, Taylor STEM Adventures Hawaii. And I've thought about doing a activity book from a science perspective to go with those. So I think that's one of those things we gotta think about, because there's so much out there, and especially now that kids are at home and teachers are constantly looking for other avenues of learning. And I like the perspective that you come from with explaining why is the hair different amongst kids. Now, when you were doing your research, I know I'm vacillating around and around, but when you were doing your research, what was one of the most interesting things that you found out?
It actually had to do with one of the explanations as to why it was curly, and it had to do with oil content in different ethnicities' hair. So that actually having a say in curliness or not. So that was something that was interesting to find out.
Okay. if you had to do this process over again of putting together your book, is there anything that you would change?
Yeah, I would have hired the second illustrator first.
Okay. You would have what?
I would have hired that second illustrator first.
Now you're going to try to keep the second illustrator on your additional publications?
Yeah, absolutely. I think she did a bang up job, so I see no reason to change.
Okay. All right. I mean, do you want to give her a shout out? So, or you may not want to, because then other people are using and she may not have time for you.
No, her name is Kathy Bolio. If you're listening, hello.
Now, okay, and we've got about 5 minutes, so I want to back up a little bit. We've talked about your media, how to get a hold of you. Is there anyone? Let's start with your Teach the Geek. Is there anyone within your Teach the Geek communication system or partnership system or anything like that that you would like to, give a shout out to, thank, or anything like that?
Well, there was, all of the people that gave testimonials and gave me feedback about the book is really helpful. One that I can think of off the top of my head is a woman named April Wenzel, and she gave me a pretty detailed, pretty detailed feedback about what she really liked about the book and areas for improvement. And anytime anyone gave me an area for improvement, I certainly took it to heart. And if I thought it was appropriate, then I made those changes. Actually, that's one of the things I talk about in Teach the Geek about public speaking. When it comes to feedback, it's important to listen to all feedback, but you don't have to implement all feedback if you don't think it's appropriate.
And that is exactly right. Sometimes feedback is just feedback, and you don't always have to implement it, because what you're doing has to be you or part of you. Now, when it comes to the book, you've already said what you would do differently, and that is use the second illustrator from the beginning. Now, based on the fact that you've done this book, and you will be doing more, because I'll be emailing you and say, Neil, you got another book coming out yet? Oh, trust me, I have got a group of people that I email and ask that question to. And one of them gave me the excuse, well, I'm stuck at home due to COVID. Well, then why are you not writing? But that's just me. I'm hard-headed, and people have asked me that question. But where do you see yourself going with your future as a patent agent or as a children's book author?
Well, as a patent agent, as I mentioned, I work mostly on medical device applications. In the future, I'd like to expand more to the other areas of the practice. Mm-hmm. So that'd be pharma and biotech, and getting experience in writing and drafting those applications would be wonderful. And then with the children's book, as I mentioned, it's going to be a series. So I'm going to come up with other ideas and keep it going, and just keep going with one book after the other, and see where that goes.
Okay. I'm excited. So, hey, Neil, I have been so happy to have you on the show. And the door is open if you like to come back at another time, based on, your trajectory. Please do not hesitate to ask. And keep me abreast of what's going on with your books and with your courses, because I deal with and talk to an enormous amount of engineers.